That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, let's go through. Let's talk about some players that have fallen so much in their fantasy value over the past month. And I'll be talking about, do I think the fall is justified? Why have we seen the fall? I'll be talking about where I currently have them ranked in our rest of season rankings over there on Patreon. But of course, before we get into it, if you have not already, you better go down there. You better drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment letting me know what you think with these players. Leave a comment letting me know how ugly I am. Leave a comment letting me know how stupid I am. Doesn't matter. Go down there, let me know your opinion. And when you do so, you get entered in to win a free Fantasy Flock Network hat. So we got to give away a couple of those right now. Going out to Dane and Trey Lance. You know, if Trey Lance is down there in that comment section, we got to give him that hat, even though it's probably a bogus hat. Nonetheless, of course, when you win that Fantasy Flock Network hat, make sure you just send me that email ASAP with your physical address so I can get that hat shipped out to you. And one other thing is make sure you go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. On Underdog Fantasy, when you sign up and you use promo code FLOCK, they match you dollar for dollar on that deposit up to $100. On Underdog Fantasy, they have weekly drafts that you can go get in. If you don't want to draft another team for us, of course you don't want to do that at that point. It's week 11. But instead, if you want to kind of have a DFS feel, but you're like, you know what? I don't want to sit there. I don't want to build salaries, because when you're building salaries in DFS, you're essentially just going up against a bunch of people who are running computer simulations and they're taking your money slowly but surely. If you want to go have some fun and actually just draft against some other real people and kind of play DFS that way, you can do that on Underdog Fantasy. They also have a ton of cool player props on Underdog Fantasy. So make sure you go sign up, use promo code FLOCK. When you sign up for Underdog Fantasy, nothing, and I repeat, nothing supports this channel more. But yeah, let's go through. Let's dive into some wide receivers first, then we'll get to some running backs at the end of the video. And let's lead it off with Mike Williams. And what I want to do right now is I want to break the season into two parts. We're going to look at the first half of the season. We're going to look at weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we're going to look at weeks 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so we're going to be looking at two separate halves, and we're going to be saying, okay, what is the story being told with this subsection? And with Mike Williams in the first half of the season, through the first 5 weeks, he was the wide receiver 3 overall. He was averaging 23 points per game. The only wide receivers he was behind in the first half of the season, Cooper Kupp and Tyreek Hill, Mike Williams was coming out and being a dominant alpha wide receiver in Los Angeles. 12 targets, 82 receiving yards, 8 receptions, a receiving touchdown. 10 targets, 7 receptions, 91 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown. 9 targets, 7 receptions, 122 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. And then very similar in week 5, 16 targets, 2 touchdown receptions, 8 receptions, 165 receiving yards. Everybody, including myself, if you would have gone over to Patreon and you would have checked out our rest of season rankings for Mike Williams week 6, I wish I had those pulled up, but I can almost guarantee you, I know we had Mike Williams as wide receiver 1. Don't know if we had him in the top 10. He was probably hovering around like wide receiver 10, 11, 12, but we had him as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy, as you had to at that point. Because the difference with Mike Williams, with this usage that he had at the beginning of the season versus what we have seen in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, was rather than being used as the vertical element in this offense, rather than stretching the field for Keenan Allen to work underneath, instead, he was operating as the alpha X wide receiver in this offense. Now, Keenan Allen was still getting his usual 10 targets a game, which is why y'all know we've been saying to buy low on Keenan Allen all season. Nonetheless, that's besides the point. With Mike Williams, he wasn't just a distraction. He wasn't the decoy in this offense. Over the past 5 weeks, we have seen Mike Williams take that fall from being a top 3 wide receiver overall to now, if you're looking at a points per game basis, Mike Williams, oh my gosh, it has gotten ugly. He is down there at the wide receiver 38, behind wide receivers like Jamal Agnew, Sterling Shepard, Darnell Mooney, Corey Davis, Kendrick Bourne, Elijah Moore. I mean, it's ugly for Mike Williams. He's been a wide receiver 4 since then. And the reason for this, and I will say really quick, let me address something. I was coming out, and just a week or two ago, I was saying that Mike Williams was a buy low wide receiver, because we were going through and we were looking at the recent struggles with Mike Williams. And I was saying, you know what? It's probably an overreaction to a small sample. Back in week 6, it's really hard to look into that at all, because remember, he suffers the knee injury. Then all of a sudden, he doesn't practice at all going into that game. He plays for whatever reason, only plays 30% of the snaps, and then really doesn't do anything in fantasy. And all of a sudden we're looking at him going, okay, well, we can't use that week in our data. I think way too many people are overreacting. Not enough people are putting context into the injury that he was dealing with. And we can buy low with the injury and he can get healthy soon and he can go back to being the wide receiver he was. I think we were wrong. I don't know if I can say that's going to be something we may be able to expect from Mike Williams going forward. And one thing that I've been trying to find as much data as I can with, and I'm not going to lie, I cannot find a concrete number with the air yards that we've had over the past 5 weeks with that split. You can find the average depth of target on the season. You can find the weekly air yards. You can't find it on a game log standpoint. If you can, please DM me, email me, whatever you can, with whatever website that you can find those weekly air yards just cataloged in as a game log. I would love to see that. I would love to see the average depth of target. But we have noticed some trends. It looks like Mike Williams is no longer being used as that alpha X wide receiver. It looks like he is maybe going back to being that vertical field stretcher that he was at the early part of his NFL career, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. We thought the coaching staff had changed that. It looks like maybe it hasn't. Now, also with Mike Williams, he's still dealing with knee swelling. And we said this in the live stream last night. I know a lot of people may want to come out here and they may want to just blame it all on the injury for Mike Williams. I don't know if we can do that because even if we go, okay, well, the reason Mike Williams has been struggling is just with the injury, it's still lingered. What's the timetable on this? It's not like he's ever questionable. He's just guaranteed to play. So if he's just guaranteed to play, can we really just continue to blame that on the injury? I don't think we can. Even if it is the fault of the injury, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day when you're getting 7 fantasy points in your lineup. You can't write to your league commissioner, hey, just to let you know, you need to bump up Mike Williams' points here. He actually is dealing with needs. It doesn't matter. I think at this point, we have to drastically move Mike Williams down our rankings. I don't necessarily think you can sell because you're not going to be getting much in return. I mean, we have moved Mike Williams down into tier 7 of our wide receivers. Now, tier 7, if you check out Patreon, it's a laughably long tier of wide receivers. It's right after tier 6. I mean, you cannot have him up there with Michael Pittman, Hollywood Brown, Deontay Johnson, Tyler Lockett, Antonio Brown. All of those wide receivers are a tier ahead of Mike Williams at this point. If you can move Mike Williams for anybody on that list, we'll be talking about one of those other wide receivers a little later on here. I think we definitely look to do so. Now let's go to another wide receiver that has seen a similar fall from grace. Let's go to DJ Moore. And speaking of DJ Moore, looking at the first month of the season, like if you look at weeks 1 through 4 with DJ Moore here, DJ Moore was the wide receiver 4 on a points per game basis during that time period. He was coming out and I was so willing to buy into this. I love the talent that you have with DJ Moore and it looked very sustainable with the role that he had in the offense. 8 targets, 11 targets, 12 targets, 12 targets. I mean, consistently getting up there with 8 receptions, over 100 receiving yards. I was bought in. I was going, okay, DJ Moore, this is the breakout. We saw it back in 2019, the historic age-adjusted production. Since then, take what was a top 5 wide receiver through the first month of the season. We look at essentially the past 6-7 weeks here. And with DJ Moore, his fall from grace has been spectacular, where he's fallen down to the wide receiver 54 on a points per game basis during that time period. He's behind players like Paris Campbell, Tim Patrick, Chase Claypool, Henry Ruggs, Kadarius Toney, Deontay Harris, Cole Beasley, Marquez Callaway, Jamal Agnew. I mean, it's gross for DJ Moore. He's been a wide receiver 5 in fantasy since then. We did not include him in our top 24 wide receiver rankings. And with DJ Moore, I'm going to say something I wasn't confident enough to say with Mike Williams because maybe Mike Williams gets healthier. Maybe Mike Williams, they change his role back to what we saw at the beginning part of the season. So I'm not going to be looking to sell Mike Williams. DJ Moore, we may just sell now. Because with the addition of Cam Newton in this offense, I'm going to go through and I'm going to say Cam Newton doesn't help anybody here. At all. Trust me, I love Cam Newton. I want to root for the guy. Seeing him score a touchdown in the Carolina Panthers jersey, of course it is exciting. Your adrenaline is pumping. You remember the good old days when we had that top quarterback in fantasy in Cam Newton coming out and just crushing it. I mean, everybody remembers the season that he comes out and he has 14 rushing touchdowns, 10 rushing touchdowns, and he's actually a decent passer in fantasy. Now, the passing efficiency has gone down drastically from what it was back in the day. He is not going to be a quarterback that really is ever able to get up to 4,000 passing yards again. Back in New England this past year, he had 2,600 passing yards. There's a reason. This is what I really want to just point out. Like we said with Odell Beckham Jr., another wide receiver we're going to be talking about in a second. you see teams go through and give us a ton of insight on what a real expectation is for a player in the NFL. For Cam Newton to get cut from the New England Patriots, they don't get anything for him. They don't even probably try to get anything for him because they know they're not going to. For Cam Newton to get cut and then from there, just hang out, not get brought in by Washington, not get brought in by Houston, not get brought in by Seattle when they're starting Geno Smith, not get brought in by Miami when they're starting Jacoby Brissett. How many teams could have used Cam Newton for a month? What was the price tag? Nothing. No teams made an act on it. Carolina's doing so with a completely different coaching staff than what Cam Newton had when he was there. There's very, very, very little similarities between this Carolina Panthers team and what Cam Newton last saw back in 2018, essentially. I think Cam Newton comes in and he limits the overall passing volume of the offense. Newton, he himself can be a good option in fantasy based on the fact that he can get to double-digit rushing touchdowns. Cam Newton can be a great option in fantasy, even if it's not going to be good for DJ Moore. I think that while, yes, Darnold's been horrible for DJ Moore over the past few months, Cam Newton's not going to be much better. So if anybody's willing to buy into a bounce back from DJ Moore, I'd be willing to sell. I mean, with DJ Moore, we moved him down in our rest of season rankings, down there right next to Mike Williams. I actually think maybe you, honestly, now that we talk through this, there's no reason for me to ever have DJ Moore ahead of Mike Williams here. I'm going to have Mike Williams ahead of DJ Moore. I think we have to move DJ Moore down to wide receiver 29. Okay, so now let's go over to our next wide receiver, Odell Beckham Jr. Not going to be talking about this that much. We've already talked about it a ton. I mean, whenever he signed with Los Angeles, we were saying, okay, you're going to go through and sell because with Odell Beckham Jr., the Cleveland Browns aren't stupid. It's not like Cleveland goes, okay, well, we're going to just hold on to him. We're not going to trade him for a second-round pick because we really want to cut him for nothing. No, we kind of saw that the NFL not really valuing Odell, signing a prove-it contract. So we were saying not to go through and trade for him this past week when he gets signed for the Los Angeles Rams. Now, I think maybe there will be an opportunity to pick up Odell Beckham Jr. on the extreme low in a week from now because Odell Beckham Jr., you were never expecting him to have a great game on Monday night. Like, to be completely honest here, you never should have expected that, knowing that, I mean, he just signed with this team, knowing that it wasn't a good matchup either against the San Francisco 49ers. This is the perfect week for them to have the bye where they could try to implement Odell Beckham Jr. effectively into this offense. I'm going to say it's unlikely that they do that. That's why we've had the stance that you were going through and you were moving on from Odell Beckham Jr. where you could. When he signed with the Rams, you were going through and you were selling for an upgrade at the flex spot. I think now with the injury to Robert Woods and also with the fact that Odell Beckham Jr. flames out on Monday night for everybody to witness, and now everybody in their mind kind of is having it set in with your realistic expectations that Odell Beckham Jr. is a bench player for you. You're never going to go through and be confident about putting him in your starting lineup. Like if someone drops him, yeah, you're going to go through and you're going to pick him up from the waiver wire. If you're making a trade, you can include him as a toss-in. If you go over to Patreon to check out where we have Odell in our rest of season rankings, we right now have him at wide receiver 37 in tier 11. I have him in the same tier as wide receivers like Emmanuel Sanders, Brandon Ayuk, Kadarius Toney, and Jacoby Myers. So I think with Odell, he's now fine to try to get into a toss-in as a piece. You're not going to actively go out there and trade for Odell Beckham Jr. Just probably now it's at least worth bringing up just because his price tag has gone down significantly. But as we've said, last time Odell Beckham Jr. had a 100-yard receiving game, Tom Brady was in New England. Now let's go over to our wide receiver that was on a sell-high wide receiver list for us more than once this season. But I think that now he is actually a fantastic buy low candidate, Tyler Lockett. With Lockett, I was saying that we were embarrassing ourselves a while ago whenever we were saying that Tyler Lockett was someone that we couldn't even consider starting whenever you had Geno Smith as the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. Then week 8 in particular, I want to point out this week 8 game because it made me look like an idiot. You actually had Geno Smith coming out throwing the ball for like 195 passing yards. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf combined for 185 of those. Tyler Lockett himself back in week 8 actually comes out 13 targets, 12 receptions, 142 receiving yards. Obviously, you love to see what you had here. And with Tyler Lockett, just like how we were saying to sell after he drops 26 points week 1, 32 points in week 2, the thing with Lockett is we've always known throughout his entire NFL career, he can come out, he can give you those spike weeks, he can look like a fantastic wide receiver overall in short durations. The issue is there's the lack of consistency over through the entire year. He just does not have that high floor on a week-to-week basis. 7 fantasy points, 6 fantasy points, 5 fantasy points, 3 fantasy points, 4 fantasy points. You've had those really down weeks for Lockett. I think this is now the time that you trade for Tyler Lockett because he's nothing different than what he has been over the past 3 years. And neither's Russell Wilson. I know a lot of people are panicking that the Seattle Seahawks got shut out against the Green Bay Packers here with Russell Wilson's first game back. I would rather not panic simply because we've had a decade sample of Russell Wilson being one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the NFL. We have 1 week to look at against an elite level defense of the Green Bay Packers of Russell Wilson completely tanking. So I know it's the most recent week. I know there's the narrative circulating as well with the finger injury. He wouldn't have come back if he wasn't good to go. I think with Tyler Lockett, this is an ultimate buy low spot. He's the same exact wide receiver that he was previously. He has access to those elite level spike weeks. He will be inconsistent. The spike weeks will be more often with Russell Wilson raising the efficiency of this offense. He had 8 targets a week ago against Green Bay, even if he didn't really do anything with them. You love to see the volumes there. I actually think you can buy low on Tyler Lockett. Like if you're looking at where he's been over the past 5 weeks, he's right next to DJ Moore in points per game. He's the wide receiver 53 compared to DJ Moore being the wide receiver 54. But I actually have Tyler Lockett ranked higher in our rest of season rankings. I have Tyler Lockett ranked 9 spots higher. I have Lockett as a top 24 wide receiver here comfortably. Now let's go over to another wide receiver that was a sell high candidate for us earlier this year. We had him on a sell high list pretty much every single week straight for 3 weeks as we prepared for Jerry Jeudy to come back in. Courtland Sutton. And I will say, I was entertaining the idea that maybe you wanted to be trading for Courtland Sutton at a discount this past week. No, Sutton's dead. You cannot start Sutton in fantasy. I don't want to say to go through and drop Courtland Sutton, but to play this out, let's do some mental gymnastics here. And let's try to figure out when Courtland Sutton is ever going to hit your starting lineup, right? He has had 3 weeks straight. Let's look at the 4 weeks that you've had Jerry Jeudy playing this season in Denver. Those 4 weeks Jerry Jeudy's been playing, keep in mind, we've been saying Judy's the wide receiver 1 year. I know that everybody knows that now, but back a month from now, whenever we were saying that, everybody hated us with the market share numbers Sutton had. The 4 weeks that Jerry Jeudy's played, week 1, Sutton drops 2 fantasy points. Week 8, he drops 6 fantasy points. Week 9, 2 fantasy points. Week 10, 4 fantasy points. His best week with Jerry Jeudy playing, he had 2 receptions for 40 receiving yards. His best week with Jerry Jeudy playing, he had 2 receptions. We are looking at a 4-game sample here. So best case scenario with Courtland Sutton, he comes out and against the Chargers in week 12, which you're not starting him in the bye week now. Against the Chargers in week 12, he comes out, he has 8 targets, 6 receptions, a receiving touchdown, 60 receiving yards. He has a great day in fantasy, 18 points. Are we then starting him week 13? Probably not, because we have this long sample of just continuous disappointment with Courtland Sutton with Jerry Jeudy in the lineup. We're not going to be able to overlook that with 1 week. So we would have to have another solid week against the Kansas City Chiefs in week 13 before we can then go, okay, well, I guess Sutton's a player we can consider for our flex spot. So you're not even having it as a possibility to play Courtland Sutton in your starting lineup until week 14. Once we get to week 14, we're going to be through pretty much every single bye. There's no reason to have that depth wide receiver on this roster then. Obviously, you're not getting much in return. I think just with the name value alone, though, you have to sell Courtland Sutton. Like, I have Courtland Sutton ranked behind Michael Gallup. I have him ranked behind Van Jefferson. I have him ranked behind Hunter Renfrow in our rest of season rankings. I see really no reason to hold on to Sutton at this point. I think if you can sell him for almost anything, I'm doing it. If we can, say, package him together with our next player here, we'll talk about one running back in this video that I got so damn wrong. Like, if we can package him together with Zach Moss and get an upgrade at the running back position, that'd be fantastic. And the reason that I'm saying that we are going to go through and we are going to look to sell Zach Moss, even though we're not going to get a lot in return. Maybe you can't even sell Zach Moss because you're not going to get anything. But this is another running back that I don't know when we can trust him to start, because y'all know with Zach Moss, I had him on a buy low video about a month ago. And the reason for that is we were looking at him coming out of the bye week and you were going, okay, well, this is a running back that so far this season, when he has been healthy, He has been the exclusive running back in the red zone for the Buffalo Bills. You saw that with him having, that span of touchdowns where he was scoring at an extremely high rate, and he was the only one in Buffalo doing so. And it was one of the most productive, if not the most productive offenses in the NFL. So we were saying, okay, I like the red zone role. And at the same time, he was getting up to having 4 targets in this offense. So you're saying, okay, well, he's a receiving running back at the same time. And the schedule, what I really liked, because you were seeing a stretch of games where he was going to be playing the Miami Dolphins, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the New York Jets. We were operating under the assumption that Zach Moss was going to have the red zone role and the receiving down role in those stretch of games. And that was going to be the case. Zach Moss was 100% a player we wanted to be buying the dip with, buying low, and then going through and saying, okay, well, maybe we then look to flip Zach Moss after this stretch of games at a profit when he's going to go through a much harder schedule against the Colts, the Saints, the Patriots, the Buccaneers, the Panthers, the Patriots. The Buffalo Bills, their schedule went from being, pretty much the easiest in the NFL to now it's about to get pretty damn tough for these running back matchups. And now at the same time, you're living in a world where Zach Moss doesn't have the exclusive goal line role. So our initial plan with Zach Moss was to buy at a low point, ride it out with that high-end running back 2 production during that great stretch of games against the Dolphins, the Jags, and the Jets. And then before we had this tough schedule, then we were going to sell at that profit and move on to our next running back. Well, how about this played out? Zach Moss, okay, against the Dolphins, he has 6 receptions, 40 receiving yards, kind of saving his fantasy day in week 8. But then week 9, suffers the concussion. And then in week 10, he comes out and loses touches to Devin Singletary and Matt Breida, tanking his fantasy value. That's the reality that we lived in. And now we're still going to have that tough schedule of games coming up. I don't know when we can realistically start Zach Moss in our lineup. So I may just go through and look to sell Zach Moss where we have him. But of course, thank you so much for everybody who came out to the live stream, everybody supporting the channel. I really appreciate all of y'all. If you have not gone down there already, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. Also, if you have not decided to go and support the show on Patreon, you can do that. Or if not, just go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. I promise you there's no better way, and I repeat, no better way to support this channel. Sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Go check out some of those player props. Go get in a fantasy draft. When you make your first deposit and you use promo code FLOCK, they match you dollar for dollar on that deposit up to $100. Find the link in the live chat, find it in the comment section, find it in the description of the video, wherever it may be. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.